Picture this. You're 17 years old, holding the acceptance letter that could change your entire life, when your own brother snatches it from your hands and tosses it into the fireplace. Fast forward 12 years, and that same brother is sitting in a university auditorium, watching in complete disbelief as the dean introduces you as the newest professor on faculty. This is the story of how one moment of cruelty became the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge I never planned. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in March. I remember because Mom always did laundry on Tuesdays, and the smell of fabric softener was drifting through our small house in Columbus, Ohio, when the mailman knocked. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw the return address, Northwestern University. This wasn't just any acceptance letter. This was my ticket out of a life that felt like it was suffocating me one day at a time. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 17, I was the girl who spent lunch periods in the library, who turned down party invitations to study calculus, who had memorized every scholarship deadline months in advance. While my classmates at Jefferson High were planning spring break trips, I was planning my escape from a house where dreams went to die, and where my older brother Marcus had made it his personal mission to remind me daily that people like us didn't want more. Marcus was 21 then, a college dropout who'd moved back home after flunking out of community college. He worked part-time at an auto parts store and spent most evenings on our worn-out couch, beer in hand, making comments about how I thought I was better than everyone else. The truth was, I didn't think I was better than anyone. I just knew I wanted something different. That Tuesday evening, I held the Northwestern envelope with trembling fingers. The weight of it felt promising, thick with possibility. Dad was working his second shift at the factory, and Mom was folding towels in the living room while some game show played in the background. Marcus was there too, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up at the screen. I could have opened it in my room. I should have. But something about the moment felt too big to experience alone. I wanted to share this with my family, wanted them to see that all those nights I'd chosen homework over hanging out, all those mornings I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. to study before school, all those sacrifices had led to something real. My hands shook as I tore open the envelope. The first word I saw was, "Congratulations." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I'd gotten in. Not just gotten in, but they were offering me a partial scholarship. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Combined with the money I'd saved from my weekend job at the grocery store and the other small scholarships I'd applied for, I could actually make this work. I got in, I whispered, and then louder, I got in. Northwestern accepted me. Mom dropped the towel she was holding. Sarah, honey, are you serious? I nodded, unable to speak, holding the letter like it might disappear if I let go. For a moment, our little living room felt full of magic. Mom started crying, happy tears, and even reached for the phone to call Dad at work. That's when Marcus stood up. "Let me see that," he said, his voice flat in a way that made my stomach clench. I should have said no. I should have clutched that letter to my chest and run to my room. But I was so happy, so caught up in the moment, that I handed it over without thinking. Marcus read it slowly, his expression getting darker with each line. When he finished, he looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not just the usual irritation or dismissiveness, but something that looked almost like hatred. "You actually think you're going to go?" he said. "Of course I'm going." "Marcus, this is Northwestern. Do you know what this means?" He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "It means you're even more delusional than I thought. Sarah, look around. Look at this house. Look at Mom working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Look at Dad coming home every night with his back killing him. And you want to what? Abandon all of us to go play pretend at some fancy school? I'm not abandoning anyone. This is my chance to help us. With a degree from Northwestern, I could get a good job. I could help Mom and Dad. Help us? Marcus's voice was getting louder now. By leaving us? By spending money we don't have so you can go learn about things that don't matter in the real world? Sarah, you're 17. You don't know anything about anything. Mom had stopped crying. She was watching us with worried eyes, the phone still in her hand. Marcus, honey, this is a good thing. Sarah worked so hard for this. Sarah worked hard to convince herself she's special, Marcus shot back. But she's not. None of us are. We're from Columbus, Ohio. We live in a house with peeling paint and a furnace that breaks every winter. That's who we are. That's who we'll always be. And no fancy college is going to change that. I felt something breaking inside my chest. Marcus, why are you doing this? Why can't you just be happy for me? He looked at the letter again, then at me. Because someone needs to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, Marcus walked over to the fireplace where Dad had lit a small fire earlier to ward off the March chill. In one smooth motion, he tossed my acceptance letter into the flames. The paper. Caught on immediately, I watched 12 years of dreams curl up and turn to ash in a matter of seconds. I screamed, actually screamed, a sound I didn't know I could make. I lunged toward the fireplace, but it was too late. The letter was gone, reduced to nothing but black flakes floating up the chimney. What did you do? Mom's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus, what did you do? I saved her from herself, he said, but his voice was shaking now, like maybe he was starting to realize the magnitude of what he'd just done. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I stood there staring at the fireplace, at the place where my future had just gone up in smoke, and felt something inside me shut down completely. They'll send another copy, I finally managed to say. I can call them. They'll send another copy. Marcus shook his head. Sarah, even if they do, how are you going to pay for it? You think that partial scholarship is enough? You think Mom and Dad can help? Look around. We can barely afford groceries. He was right, and we all knew it. The partial scholarship would cover maybe half of tuition. I'd need loans for the rest, loans that required a co-signer with good credit. Dad's credit was shot from medical bills after his heart attack 2 years earlier. Mom had never had credit in her name. And Marcus, well, Marcus wasn't about to help. Me now. I hate you, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd ever said those words to another person and meant them completely. Marcus's face went pale. Sarah, I hate you, and I will never forgive you for this. Never. I walked to my room and closed the door. Then I called Northwestern's admissions office and learned what I already knew. Without the financial means to accept their offer, my spot would go to someone else. The deadline for acceptance was in 2 weeks. There was no way I could figure out financing at that time. That night, I made myself a promise. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but someday I would prove Marcus wrong. Someday I would make it out of Columbus, Ohio. And when I did, he would know exactly what he'd cost me, and exactly what I'd accomplished despite him. I just never imagined it would take 12 years, or that when that moment finally came, it would be even sweeter than I'd dreamed. The weeks following that March evening passed like I was underwater. I went to school, came home, did homework, went to bed. My teachers noticed the change immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez, my AP literature teacher, pulled me aside after class. Sarah, your last essay was brilliant as always, but you seem different lately. Is everything okay at home? I wanted to tell her. I wanted to explain how my brother had literally burned my future, how I felt like I was drowning in this small town, how every day felt like I was moving further away from who I was supposed to become. Instead, I just nodded and said I was tired. The truth was, I was furious. Not just sad or disappointed, but burning with an anger that surprised me with its intensity. I'd lie awake at night planning elaborate scenarios where I'd prove Marcus wrong, where I'd become successful beyond his wildest imagination, just to watch his face when he realized what he'd done. But fury alone doesn't pay for college tuition. By April, I'd accepted the reality that Northwestern was gone. I applied to Ohio State as a backup, got accepted with a small merit scholarship, but even the in-state tuition felt impossible. Dad had picked up extra shifts at the factory, and I could see the exhaustion etched into every line on his face. Mom had started talking about maybe I could take a gap year, work full-time, save money. Marcus had gotten quieter around the house. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with something that might have been regret, but he never apologized, never acknowledged what he'd taken from me. If anything, he seemed to double down on his belief that he'd saved me from making a terrible mistake. "You'll thank me someday," he said one evening when we passed each other in the hallway. "When you're not drowning in student debt like half the country." I didn't respond. I'd stopped talking to him entirely. That summer, instead of preparing for Northwestern, I worked 60 hours a week between the grocery store and a new job I'd picked up cleaning offices downtown. Every dollar went into a savings account I'd opened with a different bank than my family used. I was 18 now, and this money was mine alone. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. My plan was simple, even if it wasn't fast. I'd work for a year, save every penny possible, then start at Ohio State the following fall. It wasn't Northwestern, but it was still a degree, still a path out. What I didn't expect was how that year of working would change everything. The office cleaning job introduced me to a world I'd never seen before. I worked in a downtown Columbus building that housed several law firms, a marketing company, and a small investment group. Most nights I was there alone with my vacuum and cleaning supplies, but sometimes people worked late. That's how I met Dr. Amanda Foster. Dr. Foster was a management consultant who rented office space on the 4th floor. She was probably in her 40s, always impeccably dressed, and had this way of speaking that made you feel like whatever she was saying was the most important thing in the world. She started staying later just to talk to me while I cleaned her office. "You're different from the other cleaning staff," she said one evening in September. "How old are you?" 18, I told her, emptying her wastepaper basket. "College?" I paused. "Working on it." Dr. Foster had this ability to ask questions that got you talking without meaning to. Over the next few weeks, she pulled my story out of me piece by piece. Not the part about Marcus burning my acceptance letter, that still felt too raw to share with anyone, but the general shape of it. Small town girl, big dreams, financial obstacles. "Have you considered community college?" she asked one night. "In October." I tried not to bristle. "I want to go to a real university." She raised an eyebrow. "Sarah, let me tell you something about real universities. I have degrees from Princeton and Harvard Business School. You know where I learned the most. Practical skills that made me successful. At the community college I attended for 2 years before transferring to Princeton. That conversation planted a seed. By November, I was enrolled part-time at Columbus State Community College, taking business and accounting classes in the evenings after my cleaning shifts. Dr. Foster had convinced me to think strategically rather than just emotionally. "The goal isn't to take the most prestigious path," she'd explained. "The goal is to take the most effective path. Community college for 2 years, maintain a perfect GPA, then transfer to Ohio State as a junior. You'll graduate with the same degree and half the debt." She was right. But more than that, she became my mentor in ways I'd never expected. Dr. Foster started giving me small projects to help with her consulting work. Data entry at first, then research, then actual analysis. She paid me well for the work, but more importantly, she was teaching me skills that weren't in any textbook. By Christmas, I was taking a full course load. working part-time cleaning and part-time as Dr. Foster's research assistant, and maintaining a 4.0 GPA. I was exhausted, but I was also discovering something about myself I'd never known. I was really good at business. The accounting came naturally. The economics courses felt like puzzles I couldn't wait to solve. When Dr. Foster brought me to client meetings to take notes, I found myself understanding the problems and mentally working through solutions before the consultants even finished their presentations. "You have instincts," Dr. Foster told me after. One particularly complex project involving a manufacturing company's supply chain issues. "Good instincts are something you can't teach." At home, things had settled into a cold routine. Marcus had gotten promoted to assistant manager at the auto parts store and had moved into the basement to have his own space. We coexisted without really interacting. Sometimes Mom would make comments about how proud she was of me for making the best of things, and I could see the relief in her eyes that I wasn't bitter about Northwestern anymore. But I was bitter. Every success felt like evidence of what Marcus had stolen from me. Every A on a test, every compliment from Dr. Foster, every new skill I learned. It all felt like proof that I could have thrived at Northwestern, that his decision to destroy my acceptance letter had been exactly as wrong as I'd known it was. By my second semester, I'd developed a routine. Classes in the evening, work during the day, studying late into the night. I was living on 4 hours of sleep, but I was also saving money and building something. Dr. Foster had started introducing me to other business professionals, and I was beginning to see possibilities I'd never imagined. "Have you given any thought to what you want to do long-term?" she asked one evening in March, exactly a year after Marcus had burned my Northwestern letter. "I've been thinking about it more and more." "I want to teach," I said, surprising myself. "Business, economics, maybe management. But at the university level." Dr. Foster smiled. "That's a 15-year plan minimum. You're talking about a PhD, probably some real-world experience first. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment?" I thought about Marcus, about the look on his face when he'd told me I'd never amount to anything, about the way he'd dismissed my dreams as childish fantasies. "Yes," I said, "I'm prepared for exactly that kind of commitment." That night, I updated my personal mission statement, something Dr. Foster had taught me to write and revise regularly. At the top, I wrote, "To become a university professor and prove that dreams deferred are not dreams denied." I was 20 years old, halfway through community college, and I finally had a clear picture of where I was going. It would take longer than I'd originally planned, but it would also be more satisfying than anything I could have imagined at 17. Marcus had tried to burn my future. Instead, he'd just given me time to build a better one. Transferring to Ohio State as a junior felt like stepping into a completely different universe. After 2 years of small community college classrooms where professors knew your name, I was suddenly in lecture halls with 300 students, taking notes while the professor spoke through a microphone from what felt like a mile away. But Dr. Foster had prepared me well. While other transfer students struggled with the transition, I thrived. The business courses that had seemed challenging at Columbus State now felt like review sessions. I'd already mastered the fundamentals, and more importantly, I'd learned how to think like a business professional rather than just a student. My junior year professor, Dr. Michael Harrison, noticed immediately. After my first exam in advanced corporate finance, he asked me to stay after class. "Ms. Chen, did you take this course before?" "No, sir, but I've been working as a research assistant for a management consultant for the past 2 years. He nodded slowly. "That explains it. Your exam didn't just show knowledge of the concepts. It showed practical application. Have you considered graduate school?" Graduate school. I'd been so focused on just getting through my bachelor's degree that I hadn't really thought beyond it. But as Dr. Harrison talked about MBA programs, research opportunities, and the path to becoming a business Professor, I felt that familiar spark of possibility. The thing is, he continued, academic careers require more than just good grades. You need research experience, conference presentations, published papers. If you're serious about teaching at the university level, you need to start thinking about these things now. That conversation changed everything. Within a week, I'd applied to be Dr. Harrison's research assistant. Within a month, I was spending more time in his lab than in my dorm room, diving deep into studies about organizational behavior and leadership effectiveness. The work was incredible. We were investigating how different management styles affected employee productivity in manufacturing environments, basically trying to quantify what Dr. Foster had been teaching me through experience. I was conducting interviews, analyzing data, and co-authoring papers that were actually getting published in academic journals. By my senior year, I had 3 publications, had presented research at 2 regional conferences, and was being courted by MBA programs across the country. Northwestern, the school Marcus had convinced me I'd never be worthy of, sent me a recruitment letter for their graduate program. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and looked at it every time I doubted myself. But the most important development of my senior year wasn't academic, it was personal. I met James Rodriguez in my advanced statistics course. He was a master's student in economics, 3 years older than me, with this way of explaining complex mathematical concepts that made them seem elegant rather than intimidating. You know, you're the only undergrad who actually understands this stuff, right? He said after class one day in November. Statistics make sense to me, I shrugged. It's just patterns, James laughed. Just patterns. Listen to yourself. You're talking about multivariate regression analysis like it's basic arithmetic. We started studying together, which turned into coffee dates, which turned into long conversations about our academic goals, our families, our dreams for the future. James was the first person I'd met who understood the drive to prove yourself through achievement, who didn't think my ambitions were unrealistic or selfish. When I told him about Marcus, burning my Northwestern acceptance letter, he was quiet for a long time. That's unforgivable, he finally said. But Sarah, look where you are now. You're about to graduate summa cum laude from Ohio State. You have multiple graduate school offers. You've published more research as an undergrad than most master's students do in 2 years. Maybe he thought he was crushing your dreams, but all he did was force you to build better ones. James was right, but I still carried the anger. Every achievement felt like vindication, but also like evidence of what I'd lost. I should have had 4 years at Northwestern. I should have had access to their resources, their network, their prestige from the beginning. Instead, I'd had to claw my way up from community college. During spring break of my senior year, I drove back to Columbus to visit Dr. Foster, who had become like a second mother to me. Over dinner at a restaurant downtown, the fanciest place. In Columbus, and so different from the diners I'd grown up in, she asked me about my graduate school plans. I've been accepted to Northwestern's MBA program with full funding, I told her. Also Chicago, Wharton, and Stanford. Dr. Foster smiled. And? I think I'm going to take Northwestern's offer. Because it's the best program? I considered lying, but Dr. Foster had always demanded honesty from me. Because it's where I was supposed to be 6 years ago. Because I want to walk across that campus knowing that Marcus was wrong about everything. She nodded thoughtfully. Revenge is a powerful motivator, Sarah. But be careful it doesn't become your only motivator. The goal isn't to prove your brother wrong. The goal is to build the life you want. That summer, before starting at Northwestern, I moved back home to Columbus to spend time with Mom and Dad before beginning graduate school. It felt strange being back in that house, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, eating dinner at the same kitchen table where Marcus had dismissed my dreams 6 years earlier. Marcus was still there, still working at the auto parts store, though he'd been promoted to manager. At 27, he seemed smaller somehow, worn down by years of routine and limited expectations. We'd exchange polite greetings when our paths crossed, but we never really talked. One evening in July, about 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for Northwestern, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door. "Can I talk to you?" I looked up from the academic papers I was reading to prepare for graduate school. "What about?" He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to say, "I know you're doing well. Mom and Dad are really proud." Okay, and I wanted to... I've been thinking about what happened with your college letter. I was angry about a lot of things back then, and I took it out on you. I waited, but he didn't continue. "That's it?" I asked. "That's your apology?" Marcus looked surprised. "I mean, it worked out, right? You're going to Northwestern now anyway. The casual dismissal of 6 years of struggle, of having to work twice as hard to get to the same place, of missing out on the traditional college experience. It hit me like a physical blow." "Marcus," I said very quietly, "do you have any idea what you cost me? But you made it. You're successful now. I made it despite you. I succeeded because I had to, not because I wanted to. Do you understand the difference?" He frowned. "I don't see why you're still upset about this." That's when I realized Marcus would never understand what he'd done to me, because he'd never understood what I was capable of in the first place. To him, my success was just lucky accident, not the result of years of determination and sacrifice. "I'm not upset," I told him. "I'm grateful. You taught me that I can only count on myself, and that's been the most valuable lesson of my life." 3 weeks later, I arrived at Northwestern's campus for graduate school orientation. Walking through the same quad where I'd dreamed of studying as a 17-year-old, I felt a complex mix of triumph and sadness. I'd made it, but not the way I'd planned. As I sat in my first graduate seminar, surrounded by brilliant students from around the world, I thought about Dr. Foster's warning about revenge being a powerful but dangerous motivator. She was right, but she was also incomplete. Revenge had gotten me here. Now it was time to see what I could accomplish when I was motivated by something bigger than proving Marcus wrong. I was about to find out that the answer was everything. Northwestern's MBA program was everything I'd imagined and more. The professors weren't just academics. They were consultants for Fortune 500 companies, former executives, published researchers whose work shaped entire industries. My classmates came from investment banks in New York, tech companies in Silicon Valley, family businesses in emerging markets across the globe. For the first time in my academic career, I wasn't the smartest person in the room by default. I had to earn my place every single day. My advisor, Professor Elizabeth Warren, not the politician, but a brilliant organizational psychologist who specialized in leadership development, pushed me harder than anyone ever had. During our first meeting in September, she reviewed my undergraduate research and looked unimpressed. "Your work with Dr. Harrison was solid undergraduate research," she said. "But graduate school isn't about being solid. It's about being exceptional. What makes you think you have what it takes to contribute original knowledge to this field?" Instead of being discouraged, I felt energized. "Give me a chance to show you." That semester, I threw myself into coursework with an intensity that surprised even me. While other students were joining clubs and attending networking events, I was in the library until it closed, then continued my research in my apartment until 3 a.m. James, who was finishing his PhD at University of Chicago, would drive up on weekends and find me surrounded by academic papers and statistical printouts. "Sarah, when's the last time you took a day off?" he asked one Saturday in October. "I'll rest when I have tenure," I replied, not looking up from my regression analysis. He laughed, but I was serious. Every paper I wrote, every presentation I gave, every research project I completed was a step toward the ultimate goal: becoming a professor and proving that Marcus had been catastrophically wrong about my potential. By December, Professor Warren's attitude toward me had completely changed. My research on the correlation between company culture and employee retention rates had caught the attention of several major corporations, and she'd started including me in high-level consulting projects. "Chen," she said after a particularly successful presentation to executives at a Chicago-based manufacturing company, "you have instincts for this work that I've rarely seen in graduate students. Have you considered pursuing a PhD?" The PhD path would mean another 4 to 6 years of school, but it was the only route to becoming a professor. "I've thought about it. Think harder. With your research profile and practical experience, you could be competitive for positions at top-tier universities, but you'd need to commit completely. No half measures." That Christmas, I drove back to Columbus with a decision to make. James had proposed the week before. Nothing fancy, just the two of us in his apartment after I'd defended my first semester. Research project. Him saying he wanted to spend his life with someone who was as passionate about her work as he was about his. I said yes, but I also told him about Professor Warren's suggestion. "A PhD program means at least 5 more years of school," I explained as we sat in my childhood bedroom, the same room where I'd once cried over Marcus destroying my Northwestern acceptance letter. "And then postdoctoral work? Then trying to land a tenure-track position. We're talking about maybe a decade before I have any kind of job security." James took my hands. "Sarah, I've watched you for 3 years. You're not happy unless you're challenging yourself. If becoming a professor is what you want, then that's what we'll do." The conversation with my parents was harder. Dad, now 58, and showing the wear of decades of factory work, couldn't understand why I'd want to stay in school even longer. "Sweetheart, you already have more education than anyone in our family. When are you going to start making money and having a real life?" Mom was more supportive, but worried. "Sarah, honey, you've been working toward something for so long. Don't you want to just enjoy your success for a while?" I tried to explain about tenure, about research, about the difference between having a job and having a calling, but I could see in their eyes that they thought I was making things unnecessarily complicated. Marcus wasn't around for Christmas that year. He'd started dating someone and was spending the holiday with her family, so I didn't have to navigate that particular minefield. When I returned to Northwestern in January, I submitted my application to continue directly into their PhD program. The application process was rigorous, requiring additional research proposals, interviews with faculty committees, and recommendations from professors who barely knew me yet. Professor Warren became my champion. "Chen is the most promising graduate. Student I've worked with in 15 years, she wrote in her recommendation letter, which she showed me later. She combines analytical rigor with practical intuition in ways that suggest she'll make significant contributions to organizational psychology research." By March, I'd been accepted into the PhD program with full funding, tuition covered, plus a research assistantship that paid enough to live on. More importantly, I'd been assigned to work with Professor Warren on a major longitudinal study of leadership effectiveness in technology companies. The next 4 years blurred together in a whirlwind of research, publication, and professional development. I presented papers at conferences across the country, collaborated on studies with researchers at Harvard and Stanford, and co-authored articles in top-tier academic journals. James and I got married the summer after my second year, a small ceremony, in Chicago with just our families and closest friends. Dr. Foster flew in from Columbus to attend, and seeing her there, the woman who'd first shown me what professional success could look like, felt like a full-circle moment. By my 4th year, I was being courted by universities for postdoctoral positions. My dissertation research on adaptive leadership in crisis situations had been featured in Harvard Business Review and cited by executives at companies ranging from Google to General Motors. "You're going to have your pick of opportunities, Professor," Warren told me during one of our weekly meetings. "Stanford has expressed serious interest in bringing you on as a postdoc. with the understanding that you'd likely be offered a tenure-track position within 2 years. Chicago wants you for their Leadership Institute. Even Harvard has been asking about you. But there was one opportunity that intrigued me more than all the others. Ohio State University had reached out about a newly created position in their business school, assistant professor of organizational leadership, with a focus on crisis management and adaptive leadership strategies. Going back to Ohio State would mean coming full circle in a way that felt almost poetic. I'd started there as a transfer student, and now they were offering me a chance to return as faculty. It's not the most prestigious option, I told James as we discussed our future over dinner in our small Evanston apartment. But it's where you want to be, he said. It wasn't a question. He was right. Ohio State offered something the other universities couldn't: the chance to build a program from the ground up, to shape the next generation of business leaders in ways that honored both academic rigor and practical application. I accepted their offer in February of my 5th year, with a start date of August, right after I finished my dissertation defense. That spring, as I was preparing for my dissertation defense, I got a call from Dr. Foster. "Sarah, I have some news that might interest you," she said. "I've been invited to give a guest lecture at Ohio State's business school next month. Something about practical applications of management theory. The professor who invited me mentioned they've hired a brilliant young faculty member who's done groundbreaking research on leadership development. I didn't realize they were talking about you until I saw your name on the faculty directory." We both laughed at the coincidence, but then Dr. Foster got serious. "Sarah, do you realize what you've accomplished? 12 years ago you were cleaning my office and dreaming about someday getting a college degree. Now you're about to be a professor at a major research university, with publications that are influencing how Fortune 500 companies train their executives." I did realize it, but hearing it from Dr. Foster, the woman who'd first believed in my potential, made it feel more real somehow. "And the best part," she continued, "is that you're just getting started. The real impact of your career is still ahead of you." As I hung up the phone, I thought about Marcus, about the letter he'd burned, about the dreams he'd tried to destroy. In 2 months, I'd be Dr. Sarah Chen, assistant professor of organizational leadership at Ohio State University. The 17-year-old girl who'd watched her acceptance letter burn would have been amazed. The 29-year-old woman preparing for her dissertation defense was just getting warmed up. Moving back to Columbus felt surreal. James had accepted a position at Ohio State's economics department, so we bought a house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but worlds away from the neighborhood, where I'd grown up. As I set up my new office at the business school, hanging my PhD diploma on the wall next to my published research awards, I kept thinking about how different my life had become. My first semester as assistant professor went better than I dared hope. My undergraduate course on organizational behavior filled up immediately, and my graduate seminar on crisis leadership attracted students from across the university. The dean, Dr. Patricia Williams, was thrilled with the early feedback from students and colleagues. "Professor Chen, you've brought exactly the kind of innovative thinking we hoped for," she said during our October faculty meeting. "Your research on adaptive leadership is already being referenced in corporate training programs across the region." What she didn't mention, but what I'd learned through the academic grapevine, was that my work had caught the attention of some very high-profile organizations. The Ohio State Alumni Association had requested that I give the keynote speech at their annual leadership conference in the spring. It would be my first major public presentation as faculty, and the audience would include business leaders, government, officials, and university supporters from across the state. 3 weeks before the conference, I was working late in my office when my phone rang. It was Mom. "Sarah, honey, I have some news." Marcus got laid off from the auto parts store. I felt a flicker of something. Not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. "What happened?" "The store's closing. Corporate decision. He's been there for almost 10 years, but they're not transferring anyone to other locations." Mom's voice, was worried. "He's been looking for work, but it's hard. Most places want someone with management experience at bigger companies." After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about Marcus. At 33, he was facing the same kind of economic uncertainty that our parents had dealt with their entire lives. Meanwhile, I was building a career that would provide security, intellectual stimulation, and the opportunity to influence thousands of students and business leaders. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days before the alumni conference, I was reviewing my keynote speech when Dr. Williams stopped by my office. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow night. We've had an overwhelming response to your talk. The venue had to be changed to the main auditorium to accommodate everyone. Who wants to attend?" The main auditorium. The same building where I'd attended lectures as an undergraduate, where I'd sat in the back row dreaming about someday being the person at the podium instead of in the audience. "Also," Dr. Williams continued, "we're expecting some media coverage. Channel 10 wants to do a feature story about Ohio State's rising young faculty, and you're their primary focus. They're particularly interested in your background. Local girl who worked her way up to become a professor at her alma mater. It's exactly the kind of success story the university loves to highlight." That evening, as I practiced my speech one final time, James found me pacing in our living room. "You're nervous," he observed. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if I'm not ready for this kind of attention?" James smiled. "Sarah, you've presented research to executives at Fortune 500 companies. You've defended a dissertation in front of professors who were trying to tear apart 5 years of your work. You've published papers that are changing how businesses think about leadership. Why would this be different?" Because this time, it mattered in a personal way that had nothing to do with academic achievement. This time, I was standing in front of my entire hometown, claiming a success that Marcus had tried to steal from me 12 years earlier. The next evening, I arrived at the university early to check the audiovisual setup and review my notes one final time. The auditorium was already filling up. Business leaders in expensive suits, university administrators, alumni who'd traveled from across the country to attend. As I stood backstage, adjusting my jacket and trying to calm my nerves, I heard Dr. Williams beginning her introduction. "Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from one of Ohio State's most promising young faculty members. Dr. Sarah Chen represents everything we hope to achieve in our business school: cutting-edge research that solves real-world problems, teaching excellence that inspires the next generation of leaders, and a commitment to using her expertise to benefit our community." I peeked out from behind the curtain at the audience. The auditorium was packed, nearly 800 people. And then, in the middle section about halfway back, I saw a familiar face. Marcus. He was sitting alone, wearing a button-down shirt that looked new, probably bought specifically for this event. His expression was unreadable, but he was definitely looking toward the stage, waiting to see me speak. My heart started racing, but not from nervousness anymore. This was it. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the night he'd burned my acceptance letter. Dr. Williams was continuing her introduction. Dr. Chen's journey to this podium is particularly inspiring. She began her higher education at Columbus State Community College, worked multiple jobs to pay for her studies, and transferred to Ohio State as a junior. Through determination and exceptional talent, she earned her way to Northwestern University for graduate school, where she completed both an MBA and PhD with distinction. The audience applauded, but I kept watching Marcus. His face had gone pale. I don't think he'd fully understood what my educational trajectory meant until he heard it laid out like that. Her research on adaptive leadership in crisis situations has been featured in Harvard Business Review, cited by executives at major corporations, and is reshaping how we think about management in uncertain times. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Chen. I walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, but I only had eyes for one person in that audience. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. his mouth slightly open, a look of complete shock on his face. As I reached the podium and looked out at the sea of faces, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was my moment, and I was ready for it. Good evening. 12 years ago, I was a 17-year-old girl from Columbus who dreamed of attending college but couldn't see a path to make it happen. Tonight, I stand before you as a professor at one of the nation's top business schools, here to talk about something I learned firsthand: how setbacks can become setups for comebacks that exceed your wildest dreams. I saw Marcus shift in his seat, leaning forward slightly. The research I'll share with you tonight focuses on adaptive leadership, how individuals and organizations not only survive crises, but use them as catalysts for breakthrough success. What I've discovered is that the most effective leaders aren't those who never face obstacles. They're the ones who transform obstacles into opportunities. For the next 45 minutes, I delivered the speech of my lifetime. I talked about resilience, about the power of delayed gratification, about how the most meaningful success often comes from taking the longest, most difficult path rather than the easy one. I shared research findings, case studies from major corporations, and practical strategies for developing adaptive leadership skills. But underneath every word, I was thinking about Marcus, about the moment he'd tried to destroy my dreams, about how that single act of cruelty had ultimately led me to this podium. As I concluded my speech, I looked directly at him. The most important lesson I can share with you tonight is this: never let anyone else define the limits of what you can achieve. Sometimes the people who doubt you most are the ones closest to you. Sometimes the obstacles that seem most devastating are actually the forces that will drive you to heights you never imagined possible. The audience erupted in a standing ovation. As I stood there, accepting their applause, I watched Marcus slowly rise to his feet as well, clapping along with everyone else, tears streaming down his face. After the speech, there was a reception where dozens of people wanted to congratulate me, ask questions about my research, or discuss potential collaborations. I worked the room professionally, but I kept glancing around, looking for Marcus. I finally spotted him near the exit, clearly preparing to leave. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Then he walked over. "Sarah," he said quietly, could we talk?" I nodded and led him to a quiet corner away from the crowd. "I had no idea," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "When I heard them introducing you, listing everything you've accomplished, I had no idea what you'd become. I'm the same person I was at 17, Marcus. The only difference is that I didn't let you stop me." He nodded, looking down. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." For 12 years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd pictured exactly what I would say to him, how I would make him understand the magnitude of what he'd cost me. But now, standing there looking at my brother, this man who seemed so much smaller and more fragile than the person who'd loomed so large in my anger, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. "Marcus," I said, "you taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. You taught me that I could only count on myself, and that turned out to be exactly what I needed to learn." He looked up at me, confused. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "I'm grateful. If you hadn't burned that letter, I might have gone to Northwestern at 18 and been a perfectly adequate student. Instead, you forced me to take the long way, and the long way made me extraordinary." As I watched my brother process this, I realized that my revenge was complete, not because I'd made him suffer, but because I'd made his cruelty irrelevant. I had become more than he could have destroyed, bigger than his worst intentions, successful beyond his ability to diminish. The 17-year-old girl who'd watched her dreams burn had gotten everything she'd ever wanted. And the man who'd tried to steal those dreams had just learned exactly what he'd failed to destroy. That was the sweetest victory of all. The weeks following the alumni conference brought a level of professional recognition I hadn't anticipated. The Channel 10 feature story aired 3 times, generating inquiries from universities across the country about guest lectures and collaborative research opportunities. Harvard Business School invited me to present my adaptive leadership research at their annual symposium. The governor's office reached out about joining a task force on economic development in Ohio. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source: my undergraduate students. "Professor Chen," said Jessica Martinez, a junior in my organizational behavior class, during office hours the week after the conference, "I watched your speech online, and I wanted to thank you." "Thank you for what?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "I'm the first person in my family to go to college. My parents work in restaurants, and they don't really understand why I want to get a business degree instead of just finding a job after high school. Sometimes I feel like giving up. Like maybe they're right that college isn't for people like us." She paused, looking down at her hands. "But hearing your story, seeing what you accomplished, it makes me believe I can do it too." Over the next month, I had similar conversations with a dozen other students. Young women from small towns who'd never imagined themselves in leadership roles. First-generation college students who felt out of place in business school. International students who were fighting to prove themselves in a culture that didn't always value their perspectives. I realized that my story had become bigger than just personal vindication against Marcus. It had become proof that extraordinary success was possible for anyone willing to work for it, regardless of their starting point. That realization changed how I approached my career. Instead of just focusing on my own research and advancement, I started mentoring students more intentionally. I created a special office hours session every Friday afternoon specifically for students who felt like outsiders in the business world. James noticed the change immediately. "You're different since the conference," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "More settled, I guess." He was right. For 12 years, I'd been driven by the need to prove Marcus wrong, to vindicate my teenage dreams, to show that his cruelty hadn't defined me. Now that I'd achieved that vindication so completely and publicly, I felt free to pursue success for its own sake, rather than as a weapon against past wounds. The opportunity to expand my impact came sooner than expected. In December, Dr. Williams called me into her office with news that would reshape my entire career trajectory. "Sarah, I've been approached by the university's Board of Trustees about creating a new initiative, the Center for Adaptive Leadership. They want to house it in the business school, and they want you to direct it." My heart skipped. Directing. A research center would mean leading a team of faculty, managing significant budgets, and shaping the curriculum for leadership development across multiple departments. The center would focus on practical applications of leadership research, Dr. Williams continued, working directly with Ohio businesses to implement adaptive strategies, training executives in crisis management, developing case studies from real-world scenarios. It's exactly the kind of work you've been doing, but on a much larger scale. What's the timeline? They want to launch next fall, which means you'd need to spend the spring semester designing the program, recruiting faculty, and establishing corporate partnerships. She leaned forward. "Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that usually goes to professors with 20 years of experience. The fact that they're offering it to you after less than 2 years on faculty is unprecedented." That evening, I called Dr. Foster to share the news. At 72, she'd officially retired from consulting, but still served on several corporate boards. "Sarah, this is remarkable," she said after I explained about the Center for Adaptive Leadership. "You're 30 years old, and they're giving you the chance to build something that could influence business education across the country. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm not qualified for this." Dr. Foster laughed. "Imposter syndrome never fully goes away, even when you've proven yourself 100 times over. But let me tell you what I see. A woman who spent 12 years turning every obstacle into an opportunity, who's published research that Fortune 500 companies use to train their executives, and who's inspired countless students to pursue their own ambitious dreams. If you're not qualified for this, nobody is. As winter turned to spring, I threw myself into designing the Center for Adaptive Leadership with the same intensity I'd once brought to proving Marcus wrong. I recruited 2 senior faculty members from other universities, established partnerships with 12 major Ohio corporations, and developed a curriculum that combined rigorous academic research with hands-on practical experience. The official launch was scheduled for a September ceremony that would bring together business leaders, university officials, and media from across the region. As the date approached, I found myself thinking about the full circle my life had taken. 13 years earlier, I'd been a 17-year-old girl whose dreams had been literally burned to ashes. Now, I was directing a research center that would influence how thousands of future leaders approach their careers. 2 weeks before the launch ceremony, I got an unexpected phone call. "Sarah? It's Marcus." I hadn't spoken to my brother since the night of the alumni conference. "Hi, Marcus. How are you doing?" I got a job. Assistant manager at a logistics company here in Columbus. It's not much, but it's better than the auto parts store was. That's good news. There was a long pause. "Sarah, I saw the announcement about your research center in the newspaper. The picture of you in your office. The article about how you're going to work with major corporations. I keep reading it over and over." I waited, not sure where this conversation was heading. "I wanted to ask you something," Marcus continued. Would it be possible for me to attend the launch ceremony? I know I don't deserve to be there, but I'd like to see it. I'd like to see what you've built." The request surprised me. "Of course you can come. It's a public event." "I won't bother you or anything. I just want to watch from the back. I want to understand what I almost prevented from happening." The launch ceremony for the Center for Adaptive Leadership exceeded every expectation. The auditorium was packed, with business executives, government officials, university administrators, and media representatives. My parents sat in the front row, looking prouder than I'd ever seen them. James was there, of course, along with Dr. Foster, who'd flown in from Columbus specifically for the event. As I looked out at the audience before beginning my remarks, I spotted Marcus in the very last row, sitting by himself, watching intently. "Leadership," I began, "is not about avoiding crises. It's about transforming crises into opportunities for breakthrough growth. The research we'll conduct at this center is based on a simple premise. The most extraordinary successes often emerge from the most challenging circumstances." I talked about the center's mission, our research agenda, and our partnerships with major corporations. But underlying every word was the personal journey that had brought me to this podium. A journey that began with my brother's attempt to destroy my dreams and culminated with my ability to help others achieve their own. After the ceremony, there was the usual reception with networking and congratulations. As the crowd began to thin out, I saw Marcus approaching hesitantly. "Sarah, that was incredible. The way you talked about turning challenges into opportunities, about using setbacks as setups for success." I kept thinking about what happened 13 years ago. I nodded. "It's interesting how life works out sometimes." "I need you to know something," Marcus said, his voice becoming more serious. "What I did to you was unforgivable. I was angry and jealous and scared, and I took it out on you in the worst possible way. But Sarah, watching you tonight, seeing what you've accomplished, I realized that my biggest failure wasn't burning your letter. It was failing to believe in you." For the first time since that March evening 13 years ago, I saw my brother clearly, not as the person who'd tried to destroy my dreams, but as someone who'd been struggling with his own limitations and fears. "Marcus," I said gently, You taught me something invaluable. You taught me that my success couldn't depend on anyone else's belief in me. It could only depend on my own determination to prove my potential. We stood there for a moment, two people who'd traveled very different paths from the same starting point. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said finally. "I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am. You became everything you dreamed of becoming, despite everything I did to stop you." As I watched my brother walk away that evening, I realized that my story had reached its true conclusion. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about proving him wrong. It was about the power of resilience, the importance of betting on yourself when no one else will, and the incredible things that become possible when you refuse to let other people's limitations become your own. The Center for Adaptive Leadership would go on to influence thousands of business leaders and shape corporate culture across multiple industries. My research would be cited in boardrooms and academic conferences around the world. I would mentor hundreds of students who, like me, needed someone to believe in their potential when they struggled to believe in it themselves. But the real victory was simpler and more profound than professional achievement. I had transformed the worst thing that had ever happened to me into the foundation for the best life I could have imagined. And that transformation was complete. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.